Hey everybody, this is Perch. As we talk about Neil Gaiman and in years past, Warren Ellis, Cameron Stewart, any number of people. By the way, I'm not grouping those names together to say they're all doing the same thing. In fact, there were videos explicitly saying they're not the same. There's a lot of different things that are going on there, and the cycle of outrage likes to group people, but it's not always fair. And but more importantly, regardless of fair, it's not always accurate. People do different things. But a lot of people try to wrestle with that. So here's a mail. It's a longer mail, but I think it's well reasoned, right? It's well structured. It says, "Dear Perch, a brief comment." That's the only lie in this mail. It's not brief, but the rest of it I think makes a good point. A brief comment on the Neil Gaiman situation and the phenomenon of expose story about the concealed evil of popular artists. As a magazine writer myself, I understand the mechanism through which such stories assume their prominence. Neil Gaiman is on the cover of New York Magazine this month because Alice Munro, I don't think that's how you pronounce it, Munro, was the subject of a long profile in the New Yorker in December. This isn't to suggest that either author is innocent of sin. Munro's behavior was particularly egregious, just to point out that interest in this kind of thing is part of a broader media trend. I'm sure the writers of these pieces think they are giving a voice to the victims and fighting the culture of sexual violence, but the publishers see this thing for what it is. Sex violence sells paper. Gaiman wouldn't have made the cover of New York if it wasn't for the titillating S&M angle. He's just not that big of a deal. I'll pause there for a moment. That's absolutely true. And I don't think it's just the publishers, it's the writers. Some writers can kid themselves into believing they're taking a bold stand for sexual violence and other things, but by and large, they know. And you could tell how they write it. They intentionally write the articles in a titillating, teasing way, talking about, graphic details that actually do not matter. And you can always tell in these stories, if it's boring, because really, the parts that are wrong for Neil Gaiman are boring. I mean, boring in the sense of, pretty black and white. What was done, what was wrong. Pretty simple. When you get into the, strip the clothing off to the panties, the white frilly panties with the lace on it, that's where you're like, okay, that's detail that doesn't matter. Because it doesn't matter. And so I think that's the kind of stuff where it's clear the writer, they can again say, I'm just standing up for women. Yeah, and also trying to get people off and be popular because people like, a good juicy story where it sounds like, some shenanigans are going on. Anyway, so I agree with that point completely. Back to the mail. Francois Villon murdered a priest. William Burroughs shot his wife in the face. Hunter Thompson sicked a pack of pit bulls on some gay guys who were using his hot tub in Big Sur. Nico shared heroin needles with her own son. David Bowie got up to things in the 1960s that put Gaiman to shame, apparently. There is no correlation between being a morally upstanding person and being able to create transcendent art. There's a great short story about this by Robert Louis Stevenson called A Lodger for the Night, if I can plug a non-comic to your audience. That is a good story. And I think, to summarize kind of a little bit of this, I mean, basically, it's just that this is where the mail goes a little bit. This is you separate the art from the artist argument to some extent. Just because somebody does get found out to be a monster, it doesn't mean that their work is suddenly instantly worse, but it does mean that your perception of that work can be worse. Because, as a reader, as a consumer of art, we put ourselves into the work, a little bit of our imagination, a little bit of our emotion. And when it's revealed that the writer or the artist is a terrible person, then yeah, you can't look at it the same. But this is really this is a classic your mileage may vary moment. Some people can separate themselves, some people can't, and people separate themselves in different ways for different people. So it's but a change does take place in the perception of the work. The work itself doesn't change; it's static and in many cases written in black and white and historical. Says Gaiman can be an absolute bastard and Sandman can still be a great comic. Veneration of artists isn't the point of art. Destruction of artists, though, and the constant hunt for annihilating scandals does have a point. There's purpose behind it, although I'd argue it's an unconscious one. I wouldn't. I would argue it's often a very conscious one, but for what it's worth. After the image guys broke off from Marvel, they moved into being an artist-centered company to a whole writer-centered one. The theory being that writers would be easier to hold on to and control in the present media environment, and the money wasn't there for the artists, quite frankly. In the present media environment, the individual author or artist is in direct competition with the machinery of corporate art. Franchises, writers' rooms, creative committees. Since the advertisers are on corporate side of this confrontation, media itself is slanted in their favor. The public sacrifice of authors on the altar of sexual scandal is an implicit argument against the individual creativity and an argument for more communal, controlled, and commercial alternative. The best argument against corporate art is that most of it sucks, but that it's getting less and less material as years go by and people's expectations wither. I'm not saying Neil Gaiman isn't a creep or that Alice Munro isn't a monster. I'm just saying that this is very dirty business from every angle, and there's unintended consequences of playing into the cycle of outrage and scandal. Biggest surprise about this is that Gaiman is a dom. I would have pegged him differently. Yeah, no pun intended there. Um, uh, Again, you guys do a great job with these last sentences. I mean, so I think that's a well written mail, and I think it's well reasoned. I think I have a different opinion on some of it. Kind of like as I said before, the art doesn't change, but our perception of it does. I also think, and this is going to be a really sick bastardization of the word art, but in many cases, the scandal, the expose, is a work of art itself. Not a good one, and the word art probably sticks in people's mouths as they hear me say it, but it's a product. Is kind of what you're saying. The product of Neil Gaiman was that a guy came around, he told some stories. They were commercially viable, or the people could commercialize them. It's sci-fi. There's a market for that. We can make money. So he got people to help promote it. His legend grew, or his ability to reach more people grew. He wrote more stories, became a more famous artist, and it sold. And as he got more famous and more known for his work, um, so becomes the benefit of taking him down. Once you are famous, um, you make more of a story in that piece of art. I'm using air quotes. That is your destruction. Now, all that said, that doesn't take away from the fact that Gaiman did some bad things. And I think, and there's some people in the comments I've seen for other videos of mine that said things like, he did nothing wrong. The women were whores, basically. And don't the women have any responsibility in this? And this is where, for some of you, and I just, talking like Dad Perch here, you listened to too many videos about evil women and bitchy women. Do they exist? You bet. Do the women who were sleeping around with Gaiman and getting in themselves involved, all this stuff, they have no responsibility? Are they innocent victims because, things went, depending on who you believe, things went wrong against their favor? No, they're not innocent victims. A lot of them put themselves into this situation. That doesn't make it right. There's two people here. And just because somebody wanders into a situation doesn't give the other person a free pass to take advantage of that situation. Both people have a responsibility, one, not to get themselves there, and two, not to take advantage of people who do. It's not like, well, they consented by, getting involved in some of my sex games and then 20 years later decided they didn't like it. Not exactly. Is that true for some? Yeah, maybe. But I'll put it to you this way, and this is why I say kind of as the Dad Perch comment. For those of you who have children, you have a son, you have a daughter. If one day your daughter gets caught up in all this, you may be disappointed in your daughter. You might say, how did you let yourself get into this situation? You should know better than to go, and play kind of sex games with Deviant. You should know better. And you might be disappointed, but it's still your daughter, and you're still going to feel some protection over her. At the same time, you're going to wonder, like, well, if you were willing to do this, meaning your daughter's willing to do this kind of activity, why was a guy like, well, she said yes, so fuck it, we're going to do all this crazy shit and choke her and everything else? It's there's responsibility on both ends. I said the situation does differ from person to person to person. Everyone's is unique. In Neil's case, there's certainly a question of whether it was consensual. He says it was. There's some better, at least some. Uh, there's some more evidence to suggest that maybe not. Um, why wasn't something flagged earlier? Well, some of it was. It's not like somebody just woke up one day and said, "I'm pissed about something that happened 20 years ago." Some of these stories were out there and nobody would listen. To the writer's point, Gaiman wasn't enough of a story at that point that doing an expose and bringing it to light, anyone would have cared, because he was more of a nobody back then and didn't matter. It was a different time. It wouldn't have had an impact. Now the story does, so you have people in the media, in these magazines, who are suddenly willing to take it on because they can make money off of it. Doesn't mean that everybody involved just woke up today and decided, I'm going to be mad about it. It means that now people are willing to tell the story. It's a messy situation. It's a grown up, messy, tough situation. A lot of these things are. It is a lie to just, reduce kind of the morality of all this down to a bumper sticker. Life doesn't work that way. If you find yourself in that position with, Gaiman did nothing wrong as your mantra, you're not thinking this through. You're not thinking at all. These are complicated situations. I think, look, the best way to think about it is look at it from every angle. Look at it as if it was your children. Look at it as if it was your daughter or your son on either side of this whole thing. Chances are, if you can look at it critically like that, you're not going to say, well, one person was completely in the right because the other person was just willing to spread her legs. So what's the deal? It's unlikely you would have that outcome of thought. So, but to the letter writer's point, I think there is a huge aspect to this, which is the media wanting a pound of flesh that they can sell for the week before they go off looking for the next pound of flesh. And it's too much of a machine. It is a corporate attention, money grabbing, money grubbing machine. And, we get to choose, you get to choose if you want to be gamed by that. And by the way, it sounds, by me saying gamed, it sounds like I'm shaming you if you do, but everyone's looking for entertainment. Hopefully most of the time you're looking for a good, hero or fantasy story or sci-fi story or whatever it happens to be. But, if we're being honest with each other, sometimes some of you are out looking for scandal. That's why reality TV got so popular. Who wants to see a show about like a group of people living in a house shouting at each other, maybe hooking up? That's not entertaining. But it is for some people. Like, I never watched or got the appeal of Jersey Shores, but lots of people did watch that. I have no idea why. But sometimes people go looking for entertainment of a rich, new fantasy world of new characters and imagination. And sometimes you go looking for a story where, a popular person gets taken down a few pegs in an embarrassing way. And that's the machine. Anyway, thank you for writing the mail. It's a complicated topic. And you're going to have different ways that you look at it. You're going to have different ways that you view that. That's certainly than me. We all have different opinions on it. And I'm not trying to change yours. You call me a fence sitter for that, so be it. Don't care. Everybody's got different opinion. This is mine. I try and reason it out the best way that I can. Maybe new evidence or new thought will come to light and I'll change my opinion because that's human. You do the best you can. And the thing that I think is true in all this, and like I said in the other video, is however you feel about this situation, it is distracting to comics, to having a stable, good business, and it's destructive. This is destructive when all is said and done. Whether you believe her, believe him, believe nobody, we're talking about this, and we're not talking about a cool new comic that came out this week. No, that seems like a shame. Unless, like I said earlier, comics really are kind of boring, and your entertainment is a scandal. In which case, I guess good news for you. There's lots and lots of options out there.